Operation Marge is the name of the mission to Papua New Guinea to find World War II fighter ace Richard Bong's missing airplane. The Bong Heritage Center in Superior played a major role in getting the expedition rolling. And this November, they'll host a gala recap on what they found. Dave Anderson gives us a preview.
This P38 fighter on display in Superior is a replica of the one flown by Major Richard Bong in World War II. Earlier this year, explorer Justin Talon went to Papua New Guinea to find Bong's real plane that had crashed after mechanical trouble. The Major's family was hopeful the wreckage would be found.
It would be nice to be able to display some of the parts here in the museum if we could find those.
Talon did find the wreck. On November 14th, there will be a celebration of the discovery at the Bong Center.
We are bringing in Justin, who was the expedition lead. He's coming back.
Talon will talk about combing the New Guinea jungle to find America's most successful fighter pilot's plane. The event will have another special guest, too.
We have the head of science from the National Museum in New Guinea. He is going to be attending as well and meeting people and talking about our next steps to preserving the aircraft and preserving the site.
Justin Talon believes preserving the site helps preserve history for the next generations.
Hopefully, the entire United States and world that remembers the history of the past, and we'll see it hopefully come back to life.
In Superior, Dave Anderson, Northern News Now.
And the Bong Center Gala is November 14th at the Garden in Canal Park. It's the museum's biggest annual fundraiser, along with updates on Major Bong's plane. Tribute will be paid to retired Air Force General Ray Klazowski.